Good day everyone. So today we will discuss to you the chapter 7, the Scottish Enlightenment of the 18th century. Before we start, let me introduce my group mates. I am Michael John Garcia and this is my co-reporter, Maria Katrina Talia, Kent John Agustin, and Angelo Mesa.
The Scottish Enlightenment of the 18th century. Scottish Enlightenment, the conjunction of minds, ideas, and publications in Scotland during the whole of the second half of the 18th century and extending over several decades on either side of that period. Three of the most influential thinkers in European history emerged during the Scottish Enlightenment: James Hutton, David Hume, and Adam Smith. Since the Dark Ages, when Christianity became Scotland's religion, it had been accepted without question that God had created the world in 7 days at some point in the past. The examination of physiocracy in Chapter 5 was chiefly aimed at delineating the economic model that was embodied in Quesnay's famous tableau économique. So let's find out what is tableau économique. Tableau économique or economic table is an economic model first described by French economist François Quesnay in 1758, which laid the foundation of the physiocratic school of economics. So what was the purpose of tableau économique? The tableau économique is credited as the first precise formulation of interdependent systems in economics and the origin of the theory of the multiplier in economics. An analogous table is used in their theory of money creation under fractional reserve banking by relending of deposits leading to the money multiplier. Scotland would appear to be one of the most unlikely places in Europe to become a center of intellectual innovation. According to John Knox, the creator of Scottish Presbyterianism was a strong believer in formal schooling, but its function was conceived to be the inculcation of fixed doctrine, not the stimulation of inquiring minds. In the mid-18th century, the mists of ignorance cleared and Scotland vaulted from being one of the most backward countries of Europe to one of its most civilized. Indeed, the leader for a period in the developments that have led historians to call the 18th century the Age of Enlightenment. The developments were perhaps due in part to the closer ties with England that followed the Act of Union in 1707, made final by the failure of Jacobite rebellion of 1745, and undoubtedly the economic changes that invigorated Scottish industry in the latter half of the 18th century had some influence, but historians will not hesitate to admit that it is impossible as yet to give a convincing account of the reasons for Scotland's rise to eminence. Whatever its causes, it was a most remarkable development. A modern historian of Scotland described thus: Scotland forged ahead in the realms of scholarship and learning, of imaginative writing and creative art. Her universities were everywhere admired, her poets, novelties, and artists were lauded, her philosophers and historians gained the respectful attention of civilized people, and the books and magazines that issued from her presence influenced opinion and judgment throughout the world. David Hume, himself one of the main creators of this development and its most outstanding figure of permanent importance, wrote as early as 1757. By literature, David Hume meant intellectual production of all kinds. Scotland was distinguished in the sciences as well as in philosophy and the arts. As publishers, the Scots deserve special mention for initiating the Encyclopaedia Britannica in 1771, which remained for more than a century, the most important publication of its kind in English, and for the Edinburgh Review, founded in 1802, which led the way in establishing the high-quality periodical as a feature of modern intellectual life. The Scottish moral philosophy. To the modern reader, the term moral philosophy denotes the branch of philosophy that deals with ethics, a relatively small part of only one of the many departmental units in the modern university's curriculum. In the 18th century, the term was very much broader, embracing not only the whole of what we have today classify as philosophy, but most of the subjects now included in the modern universities, divisions of social sciences and humanities. Historians have often drawn attention to the fact that the social sciences developed from subjects that were previously included in moral philosophy, and it is sometimes inferred from this that the fountainhead of modern social science was ethics. This is historically incorrect, an error due to reading the 20th century meaning into an 18th century term, the subject matter of moral philosophy that later developed into the several social sciences was not totally divorced from ethics, but it had no particularly strong connection with it. In fact, the main source of the inspiration for the 18th century thinkers was the accomplishment of the natural sciences. The Newtonian system was especially admired as a model of what scholars should aspire to achieve. Alexander Pope, the 18th century poet, was only moderately exaggerating the view of the Enlightenment thinkers when he wrote the famous couplet, An Essay on Man. History and philosophy of social science, nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. So this view of the universe as an ordered, structured place was an aspect of the neoclassical emphasis on order and structure, which also manifested itself when God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. Alexander Pope is praising Newton because before him everybody was in the dark. Then with his theories he brought light. Newton himself had suggested, in concluding his book in Optics, in 1704 that if natural philosophy was perfected by the use of scientific method, benefits could be expected to follow the moral philosophy as well. In Hume's view, the counterpart of the laboratory experiment in social phenomena is history, which furnishes empirical data. Scientific method using the evidence of experience applied to moral subjects would lead to the creation of moral philosophy, a general body of knowledge based upon the principles of human nature, just as that method had, in the hands of men such as Newton, created natural philosophy, knowledge based upon discovery of the fundamental laws governing natural phenomena. David Hume, who as historian was one of the creators of modern historiography, took the view that mankind are so much the same in all times and places, that history informs us of nothing new or strange in this particular. Its chief use is only to discover the constant and universal principles of human nature. David Hume was the youngest of the three children of Joseph Hume, who lived a comfortable life combining the activities of a lawyer in Edinburgh and a gentleman farmer of a modest estate that had come down to him from his ancestors. David Hume is a Scottish philosopher, historian, economist, and essayist, known especially for his philosophical empiricism and skepticism. Hume conceived of philosophy as the inductive, experimental science of human nature. And also, according to Hume's theory of the mind, the passions, what we do today, would call emotions, feelings, and desires, are impressions rather than ideas.
And next, let's talk about David Hume. David Hume was the fifth son of Joseph Hume, a lawyer and a gentleman farmer from Edinburgh. Hume's ideas were to make such as impact on Western philosophy as we know them today. David Hume was the youngest of the three children of Joseph Hume. Being the younger of two sons, David knew from youth that he could have to earn his own living, since according to the established custom of primogeniture, the family estate would go to his elder brother. He had a small inheritance on his own, enough to exist on, but no more than that. Tutors provided their initial schooling till David and his brother were deemed ready to attend Edinburgh University. David was 11 years old at the time, and his brother John was 13. In the 18th century, young people matured more quickly than they do today. David stayed at Edinburgh for 3 years, and it was during his time that he appears to have begun to formulate the views that could have such a profound impact on Western philosophy. He resolved to make his fortune and fame as well by writing, and he began seriously the Scottish Enlightenment 121 about the age of 18 to work out the arguments of the book that was published 10 years later as the Treatise of Human Nature. As it turned out, Hume did win faith and fortune, but not as he had hoped. Very little attention was paid to the treatise, and it did not sell even well enough to warrant second edition during the author's own lifetime. Hume tried to repair the unpopularity of the treatise by publishing a simpler and amended version of this idea called Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding and Inquiry Concerning the Principles of Moral. This did not have the desired effect on Hume's popularity as a writer, but meanwhile, he had begun to publish brief essays on political and social questions which were very well received and established his reputation as a thinker and as a masterful writer of English prose. As an important philosopher, Hume was not recognized during his lifetime, not really until Immanuel Kant perceived that Hume had raised the most important problem in philosophy and devoted his own powerful intellect to devising an answer to what became known as the problem of induction. Much of the important philosophical thinking of the past 2 centuries was resolved around these and other issues raised by Hume. Today, Hume's importance in the history of Western philosophy is beyond question. Hume's neglect as a philosopher during his lifetime does not mean that his views went unnoticed. His philosophy was skeptical, inducing one to doubt many things previously taken for granted. About religion, it was clear to any readers that Hume was not a Christian, that he doubted the validity of arguments purporting to demonstrate the existence of God, and indeed, whether such a proposition was demonstrable by any rational method. Hume had a low opinion on organized religious institutions. In 1761, the Catholic Church added his name to the index of prohibited books. In 1755 to 1757, the Church of Scotland attempted to excommunicate him. Hume and his publications could have been burned in a different century or country. Within the scope of this study, we must confine ourselves to Hume's significance for the history and philosophy of social science. The nature of knowledge and the status of essential ideas like causations are obviously connected in Hume's general philosophy, which deals with fundamental concerns in social science philosophy. On the other hand, a study of this philosophy of knowing in the context of social science could be far too broad. In the main text that follows, I will restrict attention to Hume's more direct contribution to social science. An appended note will give a brief outline of Hume's general philosophy of science and try to indicate its relation to issues such as those raised in Chapter 3 on social laws. We discussed the tension in Scottish Enlightenment, though between acknowledging man as a social creature and insisting on his individuality in Section A. David Hume philosophy is marked by the tension of concepts, so let's have a look at how he attempted to tackle the problem. So, the problem is around the conflict between egoism and benevolence in human nature. and the state of nature, and after the contract in civil society. So Thomas Hobbes maintained that man is totally self-interested. Hobbes' theory was rejected by Hume because it failed to understand that society is a natural component of man's nature. According to Hume, man is egoistic in the sense that he prioritizes his own well-being over the well-being of others, but not to the point where the values others' well-being at zero. So if the loss of him is modest and the gain to other is great, a self-interested person may sacrifice himself for others. It's clear that Hume meant when he said that the problem of justice only arises in a world of economic scarcity, where people have limited kindness toward their neighbors. So when we say scarcity, means that everyone's welfare cannot be increased without a limit. So the issue of how scarce good ought to be distributed among persons arises. Confined generosity is simply Hume's way to expressing that what modern sociologists call social distance discounting. Hume sometimes spoke as true moral issues are no more than matters of customs and convention, which would seem to lead a degree of moral relativism that few persons could be prepared to accept. His main objective in this connection, however, was not to undetermine our moral judgment, but to question the arguments made for them. Just as in examination of religion, he did not attack the specific doctrines of Christianity or any other religion, but the demonstrations that religious offer in claiming the doctrines to be true. This did not mean that moral issues cannot be rationally discussed or the empirical knowledge has no bearing upon them, and Hume went on in the remainder of Book 3 of the treatise to write tangentially about justice and other such matters. He proceeded by contending that observation of behavior exceeds in us certain feelings of approval or disapproval, just as other sense data give us impressions concerning the physical properties of objects. Limitations of scopes do not allow us to examine Hume's moral theory further here, but we should note two things about in its anticipation of future discussion. So first, Hume's connection of moral sins with feelings of pleasure and pain associated with the observation of goods and bad behavior, respectively, was part of a line of thinking leading to the philosophy of utilitarianism, which became a powerful influence on social theory and social practice in the 19th century. Second, Hume theory invites further exploration on how man develops a moral sense. The investigation of this was the subject of Adam Smith's first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. So, let us now give some attention to Hume's political theory. Hume's idea has been described as foundation to conservative thinking, and he is regarded as one of conservatism founding father. Many of his beliefs, including as limited government, privately property in times of scarcity, and constitutionalism, are foundational to conservative political parties all over the world. He argued against state interferences with international commerce in his essay of the Balance of Trade, which foreshadowed Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. His arguments perfectly anticipated the methodology of later economics. So the question of international trade and governmental policy related to it was one of the dominant issues of continuous debate over the role of government during the 18th century. International relations generally had long been a primary object of political discussion and of scholarly interest, but prior to the 17th century, in the countries like England, The shift focus of this was upon dynastic successions. So during the 17th century, the expansion of trade brought about a shift of interest from the political to the economic aspects of international relation, not only because trade was becoming more important, but because of its recognizable relevance to non-economic matters such as military power and diplomatic influence and etc. Yung view of international trade as an affair or state was part of a more general trend in economic policy to which historians have given the name mercantilism. The main object of this regulation was to produce a favorable balance of trade, an excess of export over import. The merit of this was argued on various grounds, one of which was that it would mean an inflow into the country of monetary coin and bullion, which was regarded as desirable. So, what would happen if there were a sudden increase in the nation's money stock as bayums? As a result, English price would rise, and this would encourage Englishmen to purchase more foreign goods, while foreigners would purchase fewer English goods, while England would import more and export less. Other countries would import less and export more, and monetary metal would be delivered as payment. Price would begin to fall in England, while price in other countries would begin to rise. So this process would be repeated until enough metal was moved from England to other countries to restore the previous pricing relationship. So the analysis of Hume illustrates why enforcing tariff and trade prohibitions would be unproductive. All the individual elements in Hume's model were well known in his day, but Hume was the first, or one of the first, and certainly the most prominent writer to put them together is an equilibrium model. It is on his ground that despite the smallness of his writing on economics, Hume was a firm place in intellectual history as one of the earliest analytical economists. So the physiocrats were more comprehensive in their approach, but Hume was methodologically far more incisive. Hume epistemology. A limited consideration of Hume's political, economic, and historical writing does not sufficiently convey his position in the philosophy of science. We saw in chapter 4 how John Locke's second treatise of government had a significant impact on Western politics. Similarly, the essay concerning human understanding demonstrates Hume's effort to establish the empirical grounds of understanding. In chapter 4, we pass over Locke's theory of knowledge with no further comment. It is not possible to survey the history and philosophy of social science without paying more attention to Hume's contribution to fundamental philosophy than we did with Locke. In this note, I will give a brief resume of Hume epistemology, his theory on how man acquires knowledge with steered Western philosophy so profoundly that it agitates still. Although Hume agreed with Locke that knowledge is based on empirical experience, he saw this as leading to fundamental worries about our knowledge basis rather than offering certainty. As Bertrand Russell put it, Hume's empiricist philosophy culminated in a skepticism which none could dispute and none could accept. So, since Hume, the only philosophy open to sensible people has been one that has only the negative virtue of not being entirely incorrect, absurd, or irrelevant to human problems. The mind, according to Hume, is a reasoning mechanism that has nothing to reason about unless it given sense data. It's like a computer that hasn't been loaded with information or programs when it's born in current languages. So, according to Hume, even fundamental concepts like space, time, and the cause and effects relationship are acquired from experience. In pursuing his analysis of the mind, Hume divided all mental phenomena into two categories: impressions, which are immediate sense experiences, and ideas, which are memories of or reflections upon the impressions that one has experienced. So, it is clear Hume felt that sense experience is the primary matter of all knowledge. Ideas, general concepts, theories, universals, and all such things are secondary or derivative. So this contention that all knowledge is derivative from sense experience leads directly to the problem of induction. In Hume's Human Theory of Natural Philosophy, David Hume argued that there is no such thing as cause and effect. Rather, he said the word causality refers to a psychological tendency to extrapolate experience into the future. So we cannot know that there are necessary connections between events in the real world. So the concept of causality refers only to the tendency to extrapolate experience from one event to another. Note 2. Association of psychology. Hume's emphasis on the mental process of association formed the foundation of an influential line of psychological theory that persists down to the present. Hume not only assumed this in his political, ethical, and economic writings, but even construed epistemology as a psychological study. As we have seen in Note 1, the central proposition in Hume's theory of knowledge is that it is impossible to go beyond the data provided by sense impressions. So, David Hume was impressed by the conception of the mind as building up his understanding of the world through its reception of sense impressions. So, in his book of Optics, Newton had suggested that visual data is transmitted from the eye to the brain by vibration, carried along the optic nerves. So David Hartley generalized this and arrived at the proposition that all mental phenomena are derived from such vibration. So associationism, as it was known, become the dominant school of psychology for a time, exerting a strong influence on social sciences. Mill's analysis of the phenomena of the human mind was a straightforward statement and elaboration of the association psychology of Hume and Hartley. So the fact that Thomas Hartley could appeal to the both scientists and religionists explains his influence on associationism. By relating psychological phenomena to physiological ones in man's frame. His use to Newton's theory of vibrations appealed to scientists. So, in 1775, Joseph Priestley, a well-known chemist, released a abridged version of Hartley observation. Hartley used psychology to explain religious experience and to support the Christian belief in a better world to come.